I didn't think I'd feel this way again. You make everything feel real.
I didn't think I'd ever feel this way again. You're all I need.
For 5 years, my world had existed without color. Without faces. Without distance. Darkness wasn't frightening anymore, it was familiar, like an old room I had learned to navigate by memory. I knew the cracks in the floor by the sound my footsteps made. I knew morning by the warmth that touched my skin through the window. I knew people by their voices, not their expressions. The accident had taken my sight on a rainy evening in the city. Screeching brakes. Glass. A blinding pain, and then nothing. Doctors said maybe. Time said no. Eventually, even hope learned to walk quietly around me. That morning felt ordinary at first. I woke before dawn, as I always did, listening to the distant call to prayer drifting between buildings. Somewhere outside, a street vendor pushed his cart, metal clinking softly. The ceiling fan hummed above me. I reached for my walking stick beside the bed out of habit, then froze. Something was different. The darkness wasn't flat anymore. It shifted. Moved. I blinked, confused, my heart suddenly loud in my chest. A pale blur hovered where the window should be. Light. Uncertain, trembling light. No, I whispered, more afraid than hopeful. Don't do this to me. I squeezed my eyes shut, then opened them again. The blur sharpened. The outline of the window emerged first, then the curtains, blue, I realized with a gasp. Blue. I hadn't known they were blue. Sunlight spilled across the floor, catching dust in the air like tiny floating stars. My hands, my own hands, rested on the bedsheet, real and visible, trembling. I sat up too fast, dizzy, breath uneven. Tears came before joy. Silent, hot tears sliding down my cheeks as the room slowly revealed itself to me, like it had been waiting all these years. I could see. Pressed my palm to my mouth to stop myself from screaming. My heart begged me to call out, to run to my husband, to cry, I can see, I can see. But something held me back. A quiet, instinctive warning. Like the world itself was whispering, not yet. I stayed still. I picked up my walking stick and placed it beside me, carefully, deliberately. When footsteps approached outside the room, I lowered my gaze, letting my lashes fall, returning to the role I knew too well. When my husband opened the door and asked gently, "Are you awake?" I smiled into the darkness I no longer lived in and answered softly. Yes. I'm awake. And in that moment, I made a decision. I would keep my eyes open, but my truth closed. Because if my sight had returned without warning, maybe it wasn't just my vision meant to be restored. Maybe it was the truth. Sparkles enjoying the story? Don't forget to like, subscribe, and share so you won't miss the next shocking twist. Blue heart, I didn't decide to hide my sight out of fear. I decided because something in my own home no longer felt like home. The day my vision returned, I expected warmth. Relief. The kind of happiness that fills a room when hope finally wins. Instead, I felt watched, not with eyes, but with silence. The kind that settles only when people stop speaking the moment you arrive. That afternoon, I stepped into the living room with my walking stick tapping lightly against the marble floor. I could see everything now, the faded sofa cushions, the small crack near the window, the framed wedding photo hanging slightly crooked on the wall. But I kept my eyes lowered, my steps cautious. My husband's voice drifted from the kitchen, low and hurried. "She doesn't need to know," he said. Then silence. I paused. A moment later, he appeared in the doorway, his smile arriving a second too late. "Did you need something?" he asked, too gently. "No," I replied, tightening my grip on the stick. "I was just passing through." He nodded, but his eyes flicked behind me, checking if anyone else was listening. That look settled something heavy in my chest. For days after, I noticed the patterns. Conversations ended when I entered a room. Laughter softened, then disappeared. Doors closed more often. Kindness became rehearsed. My tea was always poured for me now, my steps guided even when I didn't ask. Pity had replaced patience. One evening, as rain tapped softly against the windows, I sat at the dining table pretending to fumble with my spoon. My husband reached over quickly, guiding my hand. "Careful," he said. "You might spill it." I almost laughed. I could see the spoon perfectly. I could see his hand hesitate before touching mine, like he was afraid I might suddenly pull away. "Thank you," I murmured. He smiled, relieved. That smile scared me more than anger would have. Later that night, lying beside him in the dark, I listened to his breathing. Steady. Unbothered. I wondered how long he had been living a life I couldn't see. How many truths had moved freely in my darkness. The city outside hummed softly, cars passing, distant horns, life continuing without hesitation. And there I was, awake in every sense, realizing that blindness had once protected me from disappointment. Now sight had returned, but safety hadn't. So I chose to pretend. Not because I was weak. But because pretending allowed me to watch. To listen. To understand the strange shift in my own home. If people believed I couldn't see, they would stop hiding. And whatever truth they were trying so hard to keep from me, I was going to find it. I learned very quickly that blindness gives people permission. Permission to forget you're human. Permission to say the things they never would if they believed your eyes could meet theirs. That afternoon, the house was full. My husband's relatives had come over unannounced, their voices filling the living room with the familiar clatter of opinions and judgments. I sat on the edge of the sofa, my walking stick resting against my knee, my head slightly bowed, playing the part they believed so completely. I could see everything. My mother-in-law sat across from me, adjusting her dupatta, her lips pressed thin. She waited until she was sure I was focused elsewhere. "This isn't the life we imagined for him," she said quietly. My husband didn't answer right away. I held my breath. "She was fine before," another voice added, "an aunt, I think. But now, everything revolves around her. She can't even pour her own tea," my mother-in-law continued, not bothering to lower her voice. "How long can this go on?" I watched my husband rub his forehead, a habit he'd picked up recently. "What choice did I have?" he muttered. "People talk." The words hit harder than any slap. Talk about me. About my darkness. About the inconvenience my existence had become. I shifted slightly, pretending to search for the armrest. My heart pounded so loudly I was afraid they'd hear it. "She's a burden," someone said bluntly. "You're still young. Your whole life is stuck." My mother-in-law sighed. "Sometimes I wonder if the accident was a sign. Some fates aren't meant to be carried this long." I bit the inside of my cheek until I tasted blood. A sign. A mistake. I had survived 5 years of blindness. I had learned to cook by touch, to move through crowded streets guided only by sound, to swallow my pride every time someone spoke to me like a child. And here they were, discussing my worth like an expired item. "She doesn't even know what's happening around her," my husband said soft. Not because it was cruel, but because it was wrong. I knew exactly what was happening. I could see the way they avoided my face. I could see the relief in their eyes when they believed I couldn't witness their disgust. I could see my husband's silence, heavier than any insult. I stayed still until the conversation shifted, until laughter returned, until my presence was once again forgotten. When the room finally emptied, I sat alone, staring at the floor tiles I'd memorized back when darkness was real. That was the moment something inside me hardened. They thought blindness made me powerless. They had no idea it had just given me the clearest vision of all. And I wasn't done watching yet. I told myself I was prepared. After everything I had heard, every cruel word spoken in my darkness, I believed nothing could surprise me anymore. I was wrong. Because hearing betrayal and seeing it are two very different kinds of pain. That afternoon, my husband said he had work in the city. His voice was casual, practiced. I'll be late, he said, tying his shoes. Don't wait for dinner. I won't, I replied softly, my eyes lowered like always. But after he left, something restless stirred inside me. A pull I couldn't ignore. I followed. Keeping my sunglasses on, my walking stick tapping lightly against the pavement, I moved slowly through the familiar streets. The city was alive, rickshaws rattling past, vendors shouting prices, the smell of roasted corn mixing with dust and exhaust. I stayed at a distance, careful, invisible in the way only a blind woman is allowed to be. He didn't go to his office. He went to a small cafe tucked between clothing shops, the kind with dim lights and quiet corners. I stopped across the street, my heart pounding, and watched. Then she arrived. She was young. Confident. Her hair fell freely down her back, her steps sure. When she saw my husband, her face lit up, not like someone meeting a stranger, but like someone returning to something familiar. He stood immediately. Too quickly. He smiled in a way I hadn't seen in years. They sat close. Too close. His hand rested on the table, and hers slid over it without hesitation. No guilt. No fear. Just comfort. Routine. She doesn't suspect anything, he said, his voice carrying through the open window when laughter paused. She can't see. She trusts me completely. I felt the world tilt. She's helpless, the woman replied, lowering her voice but not her disdain. You're wasting your life. He didn't argue. Instead, he squeezed her hand. That single gesture hurt more than all the words I had overheard before. Because it was gentle. Because it was intentional. Because it proved this wasn't a mistake, it was a choice. I stood there, my fingers gripping my walking stick so tightly my knuckles ached. Every part of me wanted to turn away, to retreat back into darkness where things were simpler, where imagination could soften reality. But my eyes refused to close. I watched him lean closer. I watched her laugh. I watched the life he had built so easily, right in front of me, using my blindness as permission. When they finally stood to leave, I stepped back into the crowd, my face calm, my heart shattered into something sharp and focused. I didn't cry. Not yet. Because now I knew. And knowing meant I could no longer pretend this was just suspicion or pain overheard through walls. My eyes had confirmed what my heart feared most. The truth was no longer hiding. And neither was I. After that day, I stopped asking myself if people were lying to me. I started watching how they did it. I returned home quieter than before, my walking stick tapping its familiar rhythm against the floor. To them, nothing had changed. To me, everything had. The house was no longer just a place I lived in, it was a stage. And I was done being a silent prop. The first test was small. At breakfast, I reached for the glass of water and let my hand drift just wide enough to miss it. The glass tipped, rolled, and shattered on the tiles. Oh no! I gasped, stepping back as if startled. My husband jumped up instantly. Careful, he said sharply, more annoyed than concerned. You should wait. You know how clumsy this gets. This gets. I stood still while he cleaned the mess, watching how he never once checked if I was hurt. Later that afternoon, my mother-in-law visited. The house smelled of cardamom tea and fried snacks. As she spoke, I turned toward her voice and smiled. Thank you for coming, Auntie, I said sweetly. The room went quiet. She stiffened. Auntie, she repeated. I'm your mother-in-law. Oh, sorry, I murmured, lowering my head. I get confused sometimes. She exchanged a glance with my husband. A look that said see? No one corrected me gently. No one laughed it off. They let the mistake sit there, heavy, as proof of how easily I could be dismissed. That evening, I dropped my purse near the sofa and pretended to search blindly. Papers spilled out, receipts, notes, things I had begun to keep track of since my sight returned. My husband noticed immediately. Leave it, he said too quickly. I'll handle it. He gathered everything before I could touch it, his movements rushed, protective, but not of me. That was when clarity settled in. People who love you help you stand. People who exploit you prefer you stay lost. Over the next few days, I tested more. I called people by the wrong names. I reached the wrong direction on purpose. I waited to see who guided me honestly, and who used my confusion to control the moment. The pattern was impossible to ignore. Kindness came with impatience. Help came with ownership. Love came with conditions. At night, alone in our room, I stared at the ceiling fan slicing the air and felt something new take root inside me, not fear, not sadness. Control. For the first time since the accident, I wasn't reacting to the world. I was studying it. Measuring it. Understanding exactly who I could trust, and who had mistaken my blindness for weakness. And as the truth revealed itself in these small, everyday moments, one thought stayed with me, steady and calm. If this was what they showed me while believing I couldn't see, what else were they hiding when they thought I never would? It was late evening, the kind of stillness that wraps the city in a soft gray haze. The call to prayer had long faded, replaced by distant car horns and the low hum of a generator from the neighbor's rooftop. I stayed near the doorway, pretending to adjust a vase, while listening to my husband pacing the balcony. He spoke quietly at first, as though afraid the walls had ears. But his words, sharp and deliberate, carried in the open night. "She's already half gone," he muttered. I froze. My hand gripping the edge of the vase trembled. Every instinct told me to run, to scream, to strike him with every ounce of pain that coursed through me. Instead, I stayed silent, heart hammering in my chest like a drum of warning. "Half gone," another voice, his own, hushed and almost reflective, answered, as though mocking himself. "Soon, when everything is secure, I'll be free. I'll leave her, like a chapter already finished." I swallowed the bile rising in my throat. The words slashed through me sharper than any argument I had imagined. This wasn't a mistake. This wasn't a fleeting frustration or a careless comment. This was a plan. A deliberate, cold calculation. I stepped back slightly, letting the shadow swallow me. The balcony light flickered against the textured walls, highlighting the faint lines of his face, the complacent set of his jaw. I had lived in darkness for 5 years, but tonight, my vision brought a clarity I couldn't unsee. Every step he planned. Every smile he wore. Every lie he thought I couldn't witness. It all made sense now. The small gestures of forced patience. The calculated moments of pity. All of it was rehearsed to keep me unaware, to keep me trapped in what he assumed was my weakness. I felt my chest tighten, a storm gathering inside me. The city lights blurred through my tears, turning the streets into rivers of gold and gray. My body wanted to tremble, to collapse, but my mind sharpened instead. I whispered under my breath. "Almost a vow, almost a promise. You will not have the satisfaction of thinking I'm blind to your truth. Not now. Not ever." I turned away from the balcony, footsteps silent against the floor, my hands steady despite the fire raging inside me. This was no longer about patience. No longer about pretending. This was the moment I realized I could see everything. And with sight came power. The decision crystallized in my mind like ice forming around a flame. I would watch. I would wait. And when the time came, I would act. Nothing would ever be the same again. The house buzzed with voices that afternoon, the scent of cardamom and fresh jasmine filling the air. Relatives had gathered, drawn by an ordinary reason, a routine family lunch, but I had chosen this moment carefully. The living room was warm with sunlight streaming through lace curtains, dust motes floating lazily in the golden light, and the familiar hum of the ceiling fan above. To them, I was still blind. To me, I could see everything. I sat at the head of the table, calm, composed, hands folded neatly on my lap. My husband lingered beside me, fidgeting subtly, a forced smile plastered on his face. He didn't know what was coming, and that was precisely the point. Can someone pass the chutney? I asked, my voice soft but clear. Heads turned, and my husband's hand shot forward instinctively. Here, he said, handing me the small silver bowl. I caught it without hesitation, and in that simple act, the room shifted. I think you passed it the wrong way, I said gently, handing it back. The handle is toward the window. See how the sunlight catches the pattern? A gasp rippled through the room. My mother-in-law's hands trembled slightly against her sari. I thought, she stammered. I smiled faintly, letting my eyes meet each face calmly. I can see, Amma. I've been able to for a while. The words fell like a stone into still water. Silence, broken only by the ticking of the ornate wall clock. My husband's face went pale, his confident facade crumbling. I continued, my voice steady, detailing the small things they had taken for granted, the new scratches on the dining table from last week, the torn edge of my husband's office chair, even the dust on the windowsill that no one had bothered to clean. Each revelation was a quiet arrow, piercing the veil of their deception. I've watched. I've listened. And now, I am no longer pretending, I said, my gaze unwavering. I know what's been said behind my back. I know what's been hidden. A long pause followed. My husband opened his mouth, but no words came. He had no excuses, no rehearsed apologies. My family's eyes darted between him and me, disbelief etched across every face. I placed my hand gently on the silver bowl, letting it rest in the sunlight. I have chosen to forgive, not because I am weak, but because I am stronger than the lies that surrounded me. In that moment, I felt a weight lift from my chest. The room that had once felt suffocating, small, and full of secrets was now open, illuminated, not just by sunlight, but by truth. And for the first time in years, I smiled freely, knowing that my eyes were open, and so was everyone else's reckoning. The streets outside glowed in the soft amber of late afternoon, the sun sinking low behind the distant skyline. Dust swirled lightly in the breeze, carrying the faint scent of roadside chai stalls and blooming jasmine from nearby gardens. I walked slowly, deliberately, letting each step ground me in the clarity I had gained, not just of sight, but of truth. For years, I had believed that darkness was my weakness. That being blind made me small, dependent, fragile. But as I moved through the city streets, the familiar hum of life around me, I realized it was not blindness that had made me vulnerable, it was trusting the wrong people. I passed a cluster of children playing cricket in the alley, their laughter ringing like music. A stray dog barked at a passing rickshaw. I noticed the cracks in the sidewalk, the faded paint on the walls, the fluttering of a torn sari hanging on a line. I could see it all. And I could feel the difference between what I had endured and what I had earned, freedom. I thought of him, my husband, so sure of his control, so confident that my blindness gave him power. I thought of the whispered conversations, the cruel remarks, the betrayals carefully hidden behind false smiles. And yet, as I walked away from the home I had once called mine, I felt no anger. No begging. No tears threatening to spill over in public. Instead, I carried a quiet strength, a calm certainty that the person I had become could no longer be dictated by anyone else's lies. A gentle breeze swept across the street, lifting strands of my hair and brushing my face. I inhaled deeply, tasting freedom in every breath. The city seemed larger now, fuller, alive with possibility. I was no longer just a woman who had survived 5 years of blindness, I was someone who had seen the world, the people, and herself clearly for the first time. I paused at the corner, watching the sun dip behind the tall buildings. The light caught the edges of a puddle, reflecting my own image back at me. For the first time in years, I saw myself without pity, without fear. Strong. Unbroken. Whole. And I smiled, softly, without anyone to witness it. Because some truths need no audience. Some victories are theirs alone. With one last glance at the street I had left behind, I stepped forward, my footsteps steady, my head held high, carrying the knowledge that sight was a gift, but seeing clearly, truly clearly, was something I had earned. And in that earned vision, I finally walked free.